It's time for your Low Country real estate market update. It's the Brian Beatty Real Estate Show. Brian is one of the top 1% real estate agents in Charleston. Find him online at listingsincharleston.com. That's listingsincharleston.com. Or call him at 843-345-1273. Now, broadcasting from the WTMA studios, here's your host, Brian Beatty.
Good morning, Charleston. Welcome to the Brian Beatty Real Estate Show. Thanks for tuning in this morning. Got a lot of fun stuff to talk about over the next hour. If this is your first time tuning into this program is designed to let you know what's going on in the real estate market here in Charleston. I take my experience as somebody that's been selling real estate for the past 11 years. I've done about 1,000 transactions in the Charleston market. We've sold already almost 150 homes this year between my team and I take that information and apply it to the real estate market and my knowledge of it so that you, as the listener, can walk away from this program with a good understanding of what's going on in this market, as well as receive an education on different facets of the real estate market. Everything from market statistics to how to buy and sell a home at the same time, which we're going to talk about today, how to avoid some mistakes when selling your house. And we're going to talk a lot about what causes a housing bubble to pop. Are we in a housing bubble? So that's what we've got planned over the next hour. If you'd like to reach out to me, you're thinking about buying, selling, or investing in real estate, I invite you to give me a call personally. My cell phone number is 843-345-1273. Again, that's 843-345-1273. Or you can visit my website, listingsincharleston.com. That's listingsincharleston.com. And on that website, you can look at what we have for sale, what we've sold, learn more about myself, my team, read some testimonials, search the MLS. Anything available for sale in the Charleston area can be found on that website, listingsincharleston.com. And of course, you can contact me if you're thinking about selling your home, or if you're just curious to know more about what your house is worth at this specific point in time. I work with a lot of people that just want to stay up to date with regard to the housing market and how trends within their particular area apply to the value of their house. So if you're interested in receiving either a monthly or quarterly update from me about the value of your home and the changes that take place over the course of time, again, send me a message at 843-345-1273. You can text or call that number. My website, listingsincharleston.com. And you can also email me. My email address is Brian, B-R-I-A-N, at listingsincharleston.com. So let's talk about housing bubbles. You know, we haven't had this conversation for several years. You know, looking back to 2008 when everything started to crash and did crash, and then the years that followed that, prices were decreasing, whereas now they're increases. Sales were decreasing, whereas now they're increasing. Certainly a lot more inventory on the market at that point in time than there is now. So let's just talk about housing bubbles. You know, are we in a bubble? Well, first and foremost, unlike the stock market, where most people understand and accept that the risk that stock prices might fall is a real thing, most people who buy a house don't really think that the value of their house is going to decrease. Some do, but most don't really take that into consideration in their planning process. I mean, traditionally, the housing market has not been as subject to pricing bubbles as other asset markets have been because of the large transaction cost of purchasing a home and carrying that investment. You know, you've got to maintain it. It discourages speculative behavior, purchasing real estate. However, housing markets go through periods of what I mentioned last week on my live show with Joe Kavanaugh of Kavanaugh Appraisals, where we were talking about the state of the appraisal market and real estate market in general. And we were saying that, you know, markets at times do go through phases of what I dubbed irrational exuberance. So I wanted to discuss what causes housing price bubbles, you know, the triggers that cause those bubbles to burst, and why buyers should look at focusing on long-term averages rather than speculative opinions and viewpoints when considering buying a house. So too often, I think homeowners make this damaging error of assuming recent price performance will continue into the future without considering the long-term rate of price appreciation. I mean, the laws of physics state that when any object, which has a greater density than air, is is sent upward, it's going to be returned to the earth because of the forces of gravity that act upon it. Well, the laws of finance say that markets that go through periods of rapid price appreciation or depreciation will, in time, revert back to a price point that kind of puts it in line with what the overall long-term average of appreciation should be. There's a process in finance called mean reversion, and that's what I'm referring to when I talk about, the effects of gravity and physics and the effects of what goes up must come down when it relates to the laws of finance. So prices in the housing market follow that law of mean reversion. In other words, after periods of rapid price appreciation or depreciation, they are going to revert back to where their long-term average rate of depreciation or appreciation indicates they should be. So home price mean reversion, it could be gradual, it could be rapid, but home prices, they might rise, they might fall quickly to a point that puts them back in line with those long-term averages, or they might stay constant until the long-term average catches up with them, if that makes sense. So let's just talk for a second about what causes a housing market bubble. The price of housing, like the price of any other good or service in the free market, is driven by supply and demand. So when demand increases and or supply decreases, prices go up. So, in the absence of some sort of natural disaster that might decrease the supply of housing, like a massive hurricane, God forbid, or something crazy like that, prices increase because demand outpaces the current trend of supply. So just as important is that supply of housing is slow to react to increases in demand because it takes a while to build a house. It takes a while to put properties on the market and for people to kind of catch wind that, hey, the market has shifted. And in highly developed areas, especially areas like Charleston, there's just not a lot of land to build on. So builders struggle with that, which is part of the reason why we're still struggling from an inventory perspective in this market. So if there's a sudden or prolonged increase in demand, then prices are sure to rise. And so once you've kind of established that an above average rise in housing prices is primarily driven by an increase in demand, then you're going to, start to look at what causes that increase in demand. And some of those things are things like, and these are things that would cause a housing bubble to occur, would be things like, an upturn in general market activity. And that in and of itself is going to create more disposable income, which people now have in their pockets. It's going to encourage spending. And of course, it's going to encourage home ownership. Another reason why a bubble might start to form is that an increase in population or, the demographics of the population entering the housing market are changed positively. I mean, look at how much we have been impacted by Boeing, now Volvo, the fact that we're an awesome destination city. Tourism is huge. I mean, we've got a lot of things going for us from the Charleston-based perspective. Another reason why housing bubbles might be formed would be just a general level of low interest rates, which we certainly have, particularly short-term interest rates. And that just helps make homes more affordable. You could also look at things like innovative mortgage products with low monthly payments or low down payment requirements. We're starting to see more and more of that come out in this market. I know that there's a guy out there doing a 1% down conventional loan with no private mortgage insurance. I mean, we didn't have these tools several years ago, but now that the market's better, now that there's overall increased sentiment in the market, lenders are starting to roll out things like this. In line with that would be things like easy access to credit or a lowering of underwriting standards, more looser lending requirements. It just brings more buyers into the market, especially if you're somebody like me that's self-employed. It's my goal to reduce my income as much as possible by writing off as much as I can so I don't have to pay the tax man as much money. Well, that doesn't always work in your favor when you're self-employed and you're trying to buy a house because a lender's more often than not going to look at your adjusted gross income. How much did you make and then how much did you reduce that income by based on all your write-offs? So there are lenders out there now that will look at your bank statements rather than looking at, okay, well, clearly this guy's taken a huge haircut on all of his expenses. A lot of that's by design. Obviously, we don't want to pay a lot of money in taxes. I sure as heck don't. You could also look at things like, the potential mispricing or the mispricing of risk by mortgage lenders and mortgage bond investors that expand the ability of, or the availability rather, of credit to borrowers. You look at things like the short-term relationship between a broker and a borrower, under which borrowers are sometimes encouraged to take excessive risk, because I'm not seeing so much of that. But that was certainly a leader of or indicator of the housing bubble. People were just biting off more than they could chew. I mean, your local bartender owned 4 investment properties, and they were all leveraged off of one another. Or you look at things like, speculative buyers that would purchase a property and they wouldn't even do anything with it. They just found a decent deal in a burgeoning market, and they turned around the contract for $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, $50,000. They found somebody that was willing to sell low, and then that person that made the offer assigned the contract to somebody else. You can also look at things like, just the overall speculative and risky behavior by home buyers and property investors that at times were fueled by unrealistic or unsustainable home price appreciation. So those are some of the things that, cause a housing market bubble. They tend to feed off one another. And a detailed discussion of each of these different points that I just made is kind of worth exploring, but I just don't have enough time to get into that. But let's talk for a second about the forces that cause that bubble that's being formed by those things that I just mentioned to burst. The bubble bursts when there's excessive risk-taking in a market, and it becomes pervasive throughout the home ownership process and just the housing system in general. So this happens when supply of housing is still increasing, in my opinion. In other words, demand decreases while supply increases, and that's what tends to result in a fall in prices, and a lot of people are left holding the bag. They didn't think that the property that they just bought that they intended on flipping was not going to increase in value by 5% over a 3-4 month period, like it used to happen at times right before our market crashed. So some of the things that cause these bubbles to burst are things like, an increase in interest rates. It puts home ownership out of reach for some people. A general downturn in economic activity. I mean, it leads to less disposable income, job loss, fewer available jobs, wages aren't increasing, they're starting to decrease. And ultimately that creates a decrease in demand for housing. And then you could look at things like simply demand is just becoming exhausted. It brings supply and demand into equilibrium, which I will say is happening in some areas of Charleston. We are starting to see some areas of Charleston level off in a way. We have appreciated for so many years now that I think some areas and some buyers are experiencing price fatigue. And in some instances, let's just be honest, buyers are just kind of pissed off that they have to spend that much money for a house in that area. So they're looking at other areas, or kind of as a misguided approach to real estate. They're saying, all right, well, I'll wait for prices to come down. You might see in some areas a small decrease in pricing, but what's happening is the rate by which properties are appreciating is just starting to slow down. It doesn't mean that we're in a bubble or that the bubble is about to burst. We might see a few micro bubbles here and there. But overall, it's still very much so a healthy market from the standpoint of a seller. Buyers, yes, you have some challenges, specifically as it relates to supply. It's hard to find properties that fit the bill. And when you find something that's priced well, it's marketed well, it's in good condition, it checks all the boxes of what you want to have in the next home you want to purchase, you're likely not the only person interested in that property. So what I want to talk about just a little bit more is how to focus on kind of the long term when you're purchasing property. I mean, housing markets are not as subject to bubbles as some other financial markets. Housing bubbles do exist, but the long-term average, in my opinion, provides a good indicator of where housing prices will eventually end up during periods of rapid appreciation, which is then followed by, and will likely always be followed by, some stagnation and falling prices. I mean, obviously the same is true for periods of below average price appreciation. There are still areas of Charleston that have not yet fully recovered from the housing crash, especially in areas where people were buying investment properties where the barrier to entry was fairly low, the $100,000, $150,000, $200,000 price points. In some instances, those prices haven't gotten back to where they were pre-crash because they were so inflated due to investors and overall speculation. So, to conclude my thought on housing bubbles in general, are we in a bubble? Overall, no. I think that there are some areas where we are starting to notice a shift. I think it's important that when you discuss the market with the agent, that you take a very long, hard look at the trends within your marketplace so that you have some realistic expectations going into the sale or going into the purchase. And that's obviously something that we do at a very high level on my team. And that's something we'd love to help you with. If you're interested in buying or selling or investing in real estate, we'd love the opportunity to earn your business. So feel free to give me a call. My number is 843-345-1273. Again, that's 843-345-1273. Or go to my website, listingsincharleston.com. That's listingsincharleston.com. Or send me an email, Brian, BRIAN, at listingsincharleston.com. When we come back, we're going to talk about some mistakes that you can avoid when you're selling your home, even if you're in a seller's market. So stick around. This is the Brian Beatty Real Estate Show on the Big Talker 1250 WTMA.
Stay tuned for more of the Brian Beatty Real Estate Show on 1250 WTMA and WTMA.com. WTMA. You're listening to the Brian Beatty Real Estate Show on the Big Talker, 1250 WTMA and WTMA.com.
The Brian Beatty Real Estate Show continues here on the Big Talker 1250 WTMA. Thanks again for joining me as we talk about the real estate market here in Charleston. 5 years I've been doing this program, giving you my expert news, reviews, and experiences as somebody that sells real estate here in the Charleston area. I've done about 1,000 transactions between my team and I here in Charleston over the last 11 years. Already sold 150 homes this year, and always a pleasure to be on this program to talk with you about what's happening in this market. It's really important to me to give you guys a clear understanding of what's happening in this market. I'm very, very big on setting the right expectations in this market. So we were just talking about whether or not we're in a housing bubble, what causes bubbles to form, what causes them to pop. Overall, I mentioned that I do not believe we are in a severe housing bubble by any stretch of the imagination. And, as a buyer, I think that there's certainly some frustration out there as to the fact that prices just continue to rise, and it just seems like the longer I wait, the more expensive it's going to become. Rents are increasing at, in some cases, alarming rates. So it's just it's expensive to afford a property in Charleston in some areas. But if we compare it to, say 2011, 2012, it's just not that much of a comparison anymore. That's just not the reality of our market. And while taking risks is not inherently bad, and in fact, taking risks in some cases is necessary and advisable, the key to making a good risk-based decision, in my opinion, is to understand and measure the risks by making financially sound estimates. That's why we sit down with our clients and we have a very in-depth discussion about the market, the trends within it, and what I think is going to happen before it happens. Again, setting the right expectations. So it's especially applicable to obviously the largest and most important financial decision that most people make, which is the purchase and financing or the sale of a home. And, selling your home, which is what I want to talk about now, especially if you've never done it before, can be surprisingly time-consuming and emotionally challenging. Strangers are going to come into your house. They're going to look through your drawers. They're going to look through your cabinets. They're going to criticize your home as a place that, is obviously more to you than just four walls and bedrooms and bathrooms and square footage and amenities. And then to top it all off, they're probably going to offer you less money than what you think it's worth. Just because we're in a seller's market doesn't change the buyer's interest and natural behavior, which is to want to get the best deal possible for them. Obviously, that's what both sides of the transaction want. They want the best deal possible. Sometimes it means the best price. Sometimes it means the most convenient terms. Sometimes it means purchasing something or selling something quickly. Sometimes it doesn't matter how long it takes, just so long as we find the right property or we find the right buyer at the right price. So there's always going to be varying degrees of motivation among buyers and sellers and investors in our marketplace. And of course, there's always going to be varying degrees of competency and representation among our real estate population. There are just, agents are different. Every agent is different. You don't get the same thing. A lot of agents use the same tools. The top agents have really figured out how to not only expose your home in the best way possible, using, quite honestly, a very costly budget to create all of that exposure. They also have the systems, the tools, the processes, and the experience so that once we find a buyer for your home, we know how to close them. That's really where the agents with experience and know-how and a results-driven mentality are going to separate themselves every time. It's the systems, it's the processes, it's the experience, it's the ability to get you from point A to point B with the least amount of impact to you emotionally and at the best price and the best terms and as quickly as possible. So I wanted to just talk about some of these critical mistakes that I think sellers are making in this market and how you can avoid them so that you can get the highest price for your house within a reasonable amount of time and, without losing your mind in the process. And I think the first one is just getting emotionally involved, which I think is it's probably the hardest thing for sellers to do, is to detach yourself emotionally from your house and to approach this transaction from the mindset of a business person rather than a home seller. Put yourself in the buyer's shoes. What do buyers want? What does your home have that you think buyers are going to want? Obviously, you live in your home a certain way, but let's look at your home. Let's look at the features of your home. Let's look at the area that your home is located in and determine its highest and best use, who we think those buyers might be, and then craft a marketing strategy around that. It sounds very simple, but for a lot of people, that's very complicated. It's very challenging to detach yourself emotionally from the process. The second mistake that I see a lot of people making is not hiring an agent. I mean, there are plenty of people out there selling their home for sale by owner, and in some instances, they are getting what the house is worth. I will say, however, that there are plenty of instances where they are not getting as much as they could. Now, think about this for a second. If you're for sale by owner, 90% of the buyers out there are already represented by another real estate agent. And a real estate agent, quite bluntly, is not going to show your house unless there's an opportunity to earn a commission. That's how they feed themselves and their families. So you're already likely on the hook for a 3% commission. Then you have to look at the extreme amount of time and energy and emotional capacity it's going to cost you to show your home, to pre-qualify those showings, to follow up with those people, to negotiate a contract at the best price and best terms possible, to make sure that you're not taken advantage of along the way because you don't have representation. The buyer likely does. They know that. And don't think they're going to play fair. They're going to do everything they can to get the best deal possible for their clients because that's what they were hired to do. So I think in many instances, if we're talking about a for sale by owner, really theoretically only saving 2 to 3%, 5-6% commission is pretty standard in our market, but they're already paying out 3% to a buyer's agent. Is it really worth it to you to go through all of that and incur the expense of marketing your property just to save a few bucks? I would argue that in most instances, you're not saving money. In fact, in most instances, not only are you not saving money, it could be costing you money. So I see that mistake being made right now. Don't get me wrong. It's easier than it has been in years to sell your home as a for sale by owner. But if your mentality is, all right, I know I'm going to have to pay a buyer agent 3%, and I'm going to price my home 3% below everything else that's selling so that I can sell it and have it be attractive to buyers, you haven't saved any money. And you've cost yourself a lot of time, energy, and frustration. And if you have a job and you're now a weekend warrior selling real estate on the side, the other thing that I would take into consideration is the value that you place on your time outside of work and your time with your family. And I'm going to tell you right here and now that a lot of that is going to be sucked up in this process. And if you're not saving money, quite frankly, what's the point? Unless you just love selling real estate. And if you love selling real estate, then you need to call me because I'm looking for people to join my team. And as I mentioned, we've sold 150 homes this year. We'll probably sell 250 homes this year. We are looking for highly talented, highly motivated people with fantastic attitudes and a sense of humor, by the way. So if that's you, give me a call, 843-345-1273, 345-1273, or go to my website, listingsincharleston.com. That's listingsincharleston.com. Always looking for rock star talent. Another mistake that I see is that there's this assumption that you must hire an agent. So what a lot of people do is when they know that they have to hire an agent, they hire the person that they come into contact with first that appears as though they know what they're talking about and reasonably have some skill and some experience as it relates to real estate. I'm here to tell you, as I just mentioned, that there are, in some instances, an extreme difference between some agents and the top agents. So my advice to you is to interview. You have to know what those differences are. It's the old adage, you don't know what you don't know. And if you just interview one person and take what they say at face value, it might sound great. But then you might interview someone like me that's, spending over $250,000 a year just in marketing, and you say, wow, there are a lot of differences there. So just interview, diversify your knowledge base. Another mistake I see is just setting unrealistic prices. And that's just what happens in a market like this. It's a seller's market. Here's typically what happens. A seller will say, oh, they sold that house for that much? Well, I'm going to list my house for this much. And I'm sure that if I interview enough agents, I'll find somebody that wants to list at my price rather than the educated, researched price that it will actually sell for. I want my price. I want to put it on the market at my price, and I want to try that price to see if it'll sell. And usually it's overpriced. But then what happens is the neighbor down the street says, they're asking that much for that house? I know my house is nicer than their house. I'm going to ask this much. And then you start to get this snowball effect where overpriced listings create more overpriced listings. And then you've got this area that starts to stagnate. And people are saying to themselves, well, what the heck? I'm in a seller's market. Why is my home not selling? And then they blame the agent. Now, the agent should be taking responsibility and putting their foot down and saying, this is what the market is telling us your house is worth. This is my suggestion if we want to sell this property. But what most agents do is to say, oh yeah, let's try that price. Let's try it. Let's see what happens. And then they start to get some showings because there's just a lot of activity in this market. And then sellers are coached into believing if I just keep the property on the market, we will continue to get showings. And as long as we continue to get showings, then maybe we will find someone to pay our price. The question is, what ultimately are they going to pay for your house based on market research and recent comparable sales? And how far are you from that mark? The farther you're off from that mark, the less showings you're going to get, and likely the more offended you're going to be when someone makes you an offer that's more than likely going to be below fair market value, which in your instance might be 10, 15, 20% below what you're asking. So that's a lowball offer. I'm not even going to entertain it. And so it just puts you in a bit of a damaging position if you overprice your property. But the other thing that happens is this. When you first list your property, your first 30 to 45 days are the best time for you to sell your house. Why? Because you're marketing to two different groups of people. Group number one are the people that are ready, willing, and able to buy a house right now. They just haven't found what they're looking for yet. So they're scouring Zillow, they're scouring the MLS, they're working with real estate agents to say, hey, if you see something that hits the market, that fits these, that fits this bill, let me know. I'm ready to buy it. So that's group number one. Group number two are the people that just enter the market every day. Something has changed in their life and now they are a home buyer. They sold their house. Wife is pregnant with their third kid. They need more space. You're retiring. Whatever the case might be, group number two is an ever-changing group of people. The reason why it's most likely that you'll sell your home in 30 to 45 days, assuming you don't have some sort of extremely unique property, or you just are the most expensive home in the neighborhood, or you're $1 million home in Somerville where there just aren't many of them. There aren't many buyers for that. The reason you're going to sell within the first 4 to 6 weeks is because you have the most eyes on the screen. They're going to see your property and they're going to make a decision to come and view it or not and make an offer or not or they're going to say, no, not at that price, because buyers know value in this market. More often than not, we are working with extremely educated buyers that are doing their research, and they're using the information that's publicly available to them through Zillow, Trulia, Realtor.com, all of these different websites. I mean, the information's out there. And for the most part, buyers are absorbing and applying that information, although at sometimes it might be misguided. They have access to the information. So if they see your home and they know it's overpriced, then guess what they're going to do? They're just going to watch. They're going to watch. They're going to wait for you to reduce your price, and then you might have a buyer. But I will venture a guess and say that most buyers out there are not going to go and view a very overpriced listing, because they're going to fear that the seller is unreasonable. So be careful when you're setting the price for your house. I have more information to share as it relates to some of the mistakes I'm seeing sellers make in this market. I do want to get through all of this content, but I'm going to take a break. If you'd like to reach out to me, you're thinking about selling your house, let's avoid these mistakes. Let's talk through the process of selling a house. Let's discuss what your home is worth and the trends within the marketplace. Talk about my marketing plan and see if it might be a fit to work together. My number is 843-345-1273. Again, that's 843-345-1273. Or you can go to my website, listingsincharleston.com. That's listingsincharleston.com. Or send me an email, brian@listingsincharleston.com. That's Brian with an I. Stick around. We'll be right back.
It's the Brian Beatty Real Estate Show. Broadcast Saturday mornings at 9 and Sunday mornings at 10 on the Big Talker, 1250 WTMA. WTMA. Now, the Brian Beatty Real Estate Show continues on Charleston's Big Talker, 1250 WTMA.
Welcome back to the Brian Beatty Real Estate Show. We're talking about mistakes you can avoid making when selling your house. And I do want to get through this information because I also want to talk about how to sell your home and buy another using something called a home sale contingency, meaning you have to sell your house before you buy something else. And how do we put everything in motion, and how do we protect you so that you don't buy a home without selling yours, or you don't sell your home without having somewhere to go? So that's what I want to talk about here coming up in just a few minutes. But to finish up this portion of the program, talking about some mistakes to avoid when selling your house, even in a seller's market. So if you're just joining us, we've already talked about things like the creation of a housing bubble. What causes a bubble to form? What causes that bubble to burst? And we talked about how that relates to the Charleston market. We talked about some mistakes to avoid so far when selling your house. Things like detaching yourself emotionally from the property is always a good idea. And, not hiring an agent if you're a for sale by owner, or hiring the first agent that you meet without properly interviewing them. And then, of course, we talked about setting an unrealistic price. And what I want to say in addition to that is that, not every time, even in a seller's market, are you going to get your asking price. What's important to know is that pricing is a very important factor as it relates to the strategy associated with selling real estate. Obviously, let's say a home, the fair market value for a home is $500,000 and you price it at $425,000. Clearly, you're going to get a ton of showings and you're probably going to get multiple offers. It's going to sell for way more than $425,000. In fact, it's probably going to sell if not $500,000, potentially over $500,000. But there is a risk associated with that strategy. The other side of that coin, of course, is overpricing your property and then expecting that someone's going to pay very close to what you're asking. Any smart buyer out there is going to negotiate. And if you want to complete the sale, you got to play the game a little bit. There was a story, and I've told this on this program before, but I was working with a seller in Mount Pleasant. He had a home listed for, I want to say it was like $1.35 million. We received an offer for $1 million. And of course, any seller that understands value, it was just ridiculous. He's like, I'm not going to respond to this offer. It's a lowball offer. And so I said, why don't we try this? Let me do my thing. Let me go back to them and let's take $10,000 off the price. So we went back to them at 1.34. I turned on, the heat a little bit. I put on my salesman hat. We sold it for 1.34. Had we not gone back to them, there's a very good chance we would not have sold that house. So even in this market, buyers sometimes they can't help themselves. They can't help themselves, especially if this is the first house that they've identified that they want to buy and they haven't some buyers they've had to have purchased the third, fourth, or fifth home that they're interested in because they lost the first two because they didn't make a realistic enough offer. But as a seller, even when you receive an unrealistic offer, I do still think that you should go back to them and play the game a little bit. One of the things that you could say is, look, I'm going to take, $2,000, whatever the number is, something small, something that, hey, if you sold it for that amount, awesome. But you go back to them and say, look, we're going to take $2,000 off the price of the house just to show you that we want to sell this place, but we're not going to entertain anywhere near your price. So if you want to buy this house and it's something that your buyers want to move into, your number has to be our number or extremely close to our number. Otherwise, we're done here. There's no point in spending any more time on this process. So sellers, even in a seller's market, I do still think you need to play the game. Now, another mistake that I have seen over the past several years as we've been in a seller's market is that people think, for whatever reason, that they cannot sell their house in the fall or winter months. I will tell you that for the past 3 years, my best month in sales has been December, which logically doesn't make very much sense, but I think about it this way. A lot of agents take time off in December, and rightfully so. It's a time to spend time with family, but we're working. We're working in December. It's easier for us to capture market share because not as many agents are out there beating the streets like we are. Aside from that, what starts to happen in the fall and winter months is sellers take their home off the market. They assume that, hey, didn't happen this summer, it's not going to happen. We might as well try spring of next year. And so you start to see inventory reduce even more than it's already reduced. And quite frankly, guys, the number of buyers doesn't really change all that much. The demand among buyers doesn't really change that much. So what happens in the fall and winter months is buyers have even less choice then than they do now. Now, of course, there are less closings because the bulk of our sales come in the spring and summer months. May, June, July are our busiest months, but that's also when there's the most buyers and the most sellers in the market. And we're a seasonally adjusted market. But I am telling you right now, if you're thinking about selling your house in the fall or winter, there's an extremely good chance of it selling quickly and for more money because we've benefited from all of the sales that took place in the summer. Those are now recent comparable sales for us. Think about it. When you list in the spring and you look at everything that sold 6 months prior, you're using fall and winter comps. They're not as strong in most cases as the spring and summer comps. So if you list in the fall or the winter, you have information at your side to substantiate at times a higher price than if you had listed in the spring. So that's something to very seriously consider. And I will tell you that if you are thinking about selling your house in the third and fourth quarter of this year, we have buyers right now that are looking for properties. They are struggling to find properties even now, and inventory is going to start reducing. So if you're thinking about selling your house, please contact me. I might be able to facilitate a no-hassle sale and sell your home to one of the buyers our team is already working with. So if I can help you with that, listingsincharleston.com is my website. That's listingsincharleston.com. Or you can give me a call, 843-345-1273. That's 843-345-1273. And of course, you can email me, brian@listingsincharleston.com. The last mistake I'm going to point out before we switch gears here and we talk about home sale contingencies for just a few minutes is not preparing your home for sale. A lot of people are under the assumption that because we're in such a good market that buyers are going to overlook the flaws associated with your house. But I'm here to tell you, if you spend that time preparing your home for sale, you work with someone like me who offers a free staging consultation for 2 hours at my cost to have a stager designer walk through your house and tell you what to do to maximize its appeal, what repairs should be made. And of course, I weigh in on that because I'm not a fan of spending people's money if it's not going to result in something beneficial for that seller. I'm not here to, play with your open checkbook. I'm here to help you make money and make wise decisions. But for those people that aren't preparing their home for sale and aren't front loading some of that time and work and energy into preparing their home for sale, it's coming back to bite them in some instances. The other thing is that buyers look at those things and they start to see dollar signs. They start to see honey to-do lists. And guess what? They're not going to necessarily give you fair market cost for those things because it's going to be an annoyance to them. It's going to be something else they're going to have to do. They're going to have to spend their time doing it. So it's really just a matter of, do you want to spend your time doing it, or does the buyer have to spend their time doing it? If the buyer has to spend their time doing it, they're going to perceive those repairs as being more costly than they actually are. So glad we got through some of that information. Again, if you're thinking about selling, please give me a call. I have multiple buyers looking for properties right now in all areas of town. We have 42 active buyers looking for properties that will sign a contract today. And then, of course, as any other real estate agent does, we have a massive list of people that want to buy, sell, and invest in real estate. So if you're a buyer, seller, you're thinking about making a move in Charleston, please give me a call, 843-345-1273. Again, that's 843-345-1273. Stick around. This is the Brian Beatty Real Estate Show on the Big Talker 1250 WTMA with just a few minutes left. We'll come back for some more important information. Stick around.
Visit Brian Beatty's website at listingsincharleston.com. The Brian Beatty Real Estate Show continues next on the Big Talker 1250 WTMA. Expert news and views on the Lowcountry real estate scene. The Brian Beatty Real Estate Show on 1250 WTMA.
Welcome back, Charleston, to the Brian Beatty Real Estate Show here on the Big Talker 1250 WTMA. You know, it seems like the last few minutes of my show are becoming my rapid fire segment because I'm so darn long-winded the first 45 minutes of my show. But I do want to talk about home sale contingencies, and I do want to get through some very important things for you to consider if you're a buyer or if you're a seller. Now, a home sale contingency, meaning you want to buy a home, but you have to sell your home first, can protect you in that process by avoiding owning two homes at once and holding two mortgages. So you have the ability to purchase the home contingent upon the sale of your primary residence. So there are ways to protect you. And of course, as a seller, there are ways to take advantage of the fact that a buyer is in that situation and can't simply buy a home and then sell theirs. And I'm going to get to that in just a minute. But if you're a buyer, you know, obviously most buyers have to sell their home before they buy a new one, especially if they're buying a more expensive property. So a home sale contingency gives you the time you need to sell and settle on your existing home before you buy the next one. So even though a home sale contingency helps bring some peace of mind to the buyer, it doesn't avoid obviously all the costs associated with buying a home. You know, you still have to spend money on a home inspection, bank fees, lender fees, appraisals. You know, all these expenses, you know, are not refunded if the deal falls through due to the property not selling on time. So the buyer, and this is just the reality of the market right now, the buyer is more than likely going to have to pay closer to the seller's price than if they had not included a home sale contingency. Meaning, if you're a cash buyer and you're just going to go and buy a house, you're going to get more favorable treatment from a seller than if you have to sell your home first. And let's say your home isn't even under contract. Let's say that you have to list your home and sell your home before you can buy the other home. Well, obviously, from a seller's perspective, you're essentially asking the seller to gamble on your ability to sell your current home and then purchase another one. So as a buyer, you know, again, I talk a lot about expectations on this program. If you're a buyer and you want to sell your home and buy another at the same time, I'm just here to tell you that those are very complicated transactions, and to tread lightly with that is something that requires an in-depth discussion with a real estate agent. And that agent has to have experience in doing that specific type of transaction multiple times, because there are a lot of pitfalls there. So as a buyer, you need to beware. And as a seller, here are some things for you to consider. Now, let's say somebody makes you an offer contingent upon the sale of their home, meaning their home is on the market right now, and once it goes under contract and sells, then they will immediately purchase yours. You as the seller have the ability to include something called a kickout clause. So here's what that means. Let's say that you accept their offer. You know, you're a seller. You accept a buyer's offer contingent upon that buyer selling their other home. As a seller, you can say, I will accept your offer. However, I'm going to continue to market my property for sale. And if I find a buyer that's interested in making an offer that does not have to sell their home, I'm going to give you 48 to 72 hours to remove your home sale contingency and buy my home, regardless of whether your home sells or not, or I'm going to kick you out and I'm going to go with the second buyer. That is a way for the seller to protect themselves. It's called a kick-out clause. And more often than not, as a buyer, if you're making an offer on a property and your home is on the market, not yet under contract, they're probably going to include that kick-out clause. Now, let's say that you're a buyer and your home is under contract and you're just waiting for it to close. Obviously, it would not make sense for you to agree to a kick-out clause because you're committed to selling your house already. You have a contract on your home and you want to buy this other person's home. You're not going to inherit the risk of having somebody come along 3 days before closing and say, hey, sorry, we got more money from someone else and they don't have to sell their home, so you're out. And then you were supposed to close in 3 days and now you've got nowhere to go. So there are very specific ways to protect yourself. So having said that, a home sale contingency can be a good thing.